The table was set. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, everything you would expect for a Thanksgiving dinner in the Taylor household. But there was something missing, something that couldn't be cooked or served on a plate. I knew it the moment I stepped into the dining room. The way the table was arranged, the way my sister was already positioned at the head, her perfectly pressed blouse glinting under the soft lights, everything screamed that this night was going to be about her. Again. Thanksgiving had always been a family affair, a time for connection. Or so I thought. Growing up, it had always been Emily who took the spotlight. Emily who had it all, looks, charm, accomplishments. Emily who never seemed to do anything wrong. And there I was, standing at the door, invisible as always. "Come in, Jess," my mom's voice called out, laced with that hollow sweetness that was so practiced, it no longer felt genuine. "Dinner's almost ready." I nodded, a forced smile crossing my face as I stepped into the room. There she was, sitting in her seat at the table, the golden child of the family, sipping wine like she was the Queen of England. Emily Taylor. My sister. My parents' golden girl. "Happy Thanksgiving." Emily chimed, her voice the perfect mix of cheerfulness and self-assuredness. She lifted her glass, and I watched as my parents followed her lead, toasting her success like it was a routine they'd done 1,000 times before. "Let's raise a glass to Emily's achievements this year," Dad said, his voice booming through the room. "She's been accepted to the best law schools in the country. She's making us proud." The words hit me like a slap. I could feel the room go still for a second. Emily's accomplishments were always praised, never mine. It was as if I had never existed in their eyes unless it was to help her with her endless projects, to prop up the pedestal she was placed on. I didn't want to ruin the moment. I never did. But the way they adored her, the way they completely ignored everything I had done for years, it made me feel small. Invisible. I sat at the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, not touching the food that sat in front of me. The scent of roasted turkey made my stomach growl, but I wasn't hungry. Not for food. Emily, oblivious as ever, turned toward me with that fake grin. "Jess, I'm sure you're next in line for success, right?" she said. "I mean, Mom and Dad have always expected so much from you." I forced a smile, my stomach nodding. "Yeah, sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. But my words didn't match the ice that had built up inside me. There was a momentary silence before Emily raised her glass again, this time looking directly at me. "Here's to Jess," she said, "the one who always makes sure everything is perfect. You know, she's always been the reliable one." Her words were sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. She knew exactly how to play the game. And my parents ate it up. The warmth that had once filled me on Thanksgiving began to fade, replaced by a coldness I couldn't shake. I sat there, frozen, as my parents smiled and nodded, as if everything was right in the world, as if we were all equal. But I knew better. This was never about equality. Then, the moment I had been dreading arrived. Dad leaned back in his chair, looking at me with that cold, disinterested gaze. "Jess," he said, his tone casual but clipped. "We need to talk to you after dinner." I nodded without a word, my heart sinking. This was the moment I had been fearing for years, the moment where my silence would be demanded. Again. We finished dinner in awkward silence, the tension at the table palpable. Emily kept talking, kept laughing, but I couldn't bring myself to join in. I couldn't bring myself to pretend. Not this time. After dinner, Emily and my parents retreated to the living room. I was left behind in the dining room, cleaning the dishes alone. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, the feeling of being invisible, of never being enough, crashing over me like a tidal wave. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I followed them into the living room, where the fire crackled softly in the background, a fake warmth filling the space. I stood at the doorway, unsure of what was coming next, knowing deep down that it was going to be worse than I had imagined. My parents sat on the couch, and Emily perched herself next to them, still basking in the glow of her own success. They looked at me, their eyes cold, calculating, as if they were about to make another decision about my life, one that didn't involve me having a say. "Jess," my dad began, his voice soft but firm, "before we start, we need you to understand something. You've been great helping out as always. But," he paused, looking at Emily for a moment, "but we need to focus on Emily's future now. She needs all the attention, all the support. We want you to stay quiet about what's coming next." I blinked. Was he really telling me this? Was he really telling me to stay silent? The words burned in my chest as he continued. "We've already planned everything for Emily's future. We've got her a scholarship, we're investing in her career. You can stay here, but we need you to be quiet about your plans. We need you to take a step back." It felt like the floor was pulled out from under me. My chest tightened. Stay quiet? This wasn't a request. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a command. I opened my mouth, ready to speak up, ready to defend myself, but something inside me froze. I realized just then that there was no use. They had already made up their minds. I wasn't part of the plan anymore. My sister, the golden child, would always come first. I could feel the tears welling up, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't show weakness. Not when it was clear that nothing I did would ever be enough to get me noticed. Okay, I whispered, barely audible. I'll stay quiet. And with that, the decision had been made. I was silenced. Again. The days following that Thanksgiving dinner felt like a blur, each one blending into the next. I didn't speak much. I couldn't. The weight of my father's words, the command to stay silent, hung over me like a cloud, suffocating everything I once cared about. Stay quiet. The directive was simple enough, yet it echoed in my mind at all hours, growing louder, sharper. I went through the motions, helping with the house, cooking meals, maintaining the perfect image that they demanded of me. I was still the reliable one, the invisible one. Nothing had changed in their eyes. Emily was still the star, the one they couldn't stop talking about, the one they saw as the future. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. That I had bigger goals, that I wasn't like them, that their approval wasn't what defined me. But now, with the way they treated me, like I was a mere shadow of the perfect family portrait, they had made me question everything. I couldn't help but wonder, why was it always Emily? Why did they look at me like I was the second choice, the one who didn't need their attention? It wasn't just Emily's success. It was everything, the way she had everything handed to her on a silver platter. The way my parents paraded her achievements in front of everyone, while I silently disappeared into the background. They were proud of Emily, always proud of Emily. But I was nothing but an afterthought. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the small mirror above my dresser. My reflection looked back at me, tired, drained. For the first time in a long while, I didn't recognize the person staring back. Who had I become? The girl who silently obeyed? The daughter who didn't matter? No, I was more than that. I had to be. I needed to take control. I needed to break free from the chains they had wrapped around me, and I needed to be seen. I sat on my bed, the silence of the house enveloping me. Emily and my parents were downstairs, probably discussing the next steps in Emily's perfect life, planning her next move like she was the only one who mattered. But I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I couldn't. I had to do something. Something that would make them notice me. Something that would give me power. I opened my laptop and started researching. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Getting out from under their control, proving that I was worth something, that was going to take everything I had. But I had to start somewhere. That's when I found it. A local community college had just launched a new program for business management. It wasn't Ivy League. It wasn't glamorous. But it was my ticket out. It was the first step in taking control of my own future. I had always been told I wasn't good enough, that I would never match up to Emily. But what if I could prove them wrong? What if I could build something for myself, something they couldn't take away? I signed up for the program. It was a small step, but it felt huge. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something for me. It didn't matter that my parents wouldn't approve, that Emily would never understand. This was my chance to take the reins of my own life. Over the next few weeks, I focused on the classes, on learning everything I could. But the more I did, the more I realized that my parents' control over me didn't end with my education. No, they had their grip on everything. My future, my choices, my voice. But not anymore. I started looking into their finances, into the business my father had built on manipulation. I knew there were cracks I had always known. The way they hid money, the way they made shady deals behind closed doors. I wasn't blind to it, and I wasn't afraid to uncover the truth. I began to make a plan, quietly and methodically. The idea of revenge didn't come to me all at once. It came slowly, like a seed planted in the darkest part of my heart. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't let them win. They had always treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. But now I would make them see me. I would make them understand that I had power. I was going to expose them, not out of anger but out of necessity. I wasn't going to let them continue their lives like they were untouchable. I wasn't going to let them keep pretending that everything was fine, while they had destroyed everything I had ever worked for. And I wasn't going to let them keep treating me like I was invisible. The first step was simple: gather the evidence. I started reaching out to people who had worked with my father, former employees, business associates, anyone who could give me information. It wasn't hard to find people who were disgruntled, people who had been wronged by him. I knew how to get them to talk. I knew what buttons to push. They didn't know it yet, but they were going to be my allies. I kept my plans quiet, of course. I couldn't let my parents know what I was up to. I couldn't risk them seeing through the cracks in their perfect little world. But I was careful, patient, and methodical. And slowly I began to see the cracks in their armor. My revenge wasn't going to be a loud explosion. It would be quiet, calculated, and it would destroy them. I wasn't just going to get noticed anymore. I was going to make them pay for what they had done to me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt powerful. Days turned into weeks, and as I sat in my small apartment, the weight of everything my family had done to me felt suffocating. But with each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was no longer the quiet, invisible daughter. I was no longer willing to stay in the background while they made all the decisions for me. I was done being the obedient one. I started getting more serious about my plan. I couldn't afford to mess this up, and I couldn't afford to act impulsively. Patience was key. I had learned from my father that control was everything, and I would use his own tactics against him. But I would do it smarter. I would do it in a way that made sure they could never come back from it. The first thing I needed was evidence. I needed to prove that my father had been playing the system for years, hiding money, manipulating the market, and using his position to cheat people. His business empire wasn't built on honesty or integrity. It was built on lies, deception, and manipulation. I just had to find the pieces of the puzzle and put them together. I reached out to a few people who used to work with him, disgruntled employees, business partners who had been burned. I didn't tell them my full intentions, of course. I just told them I needed help gathering some information. I made it sound harmless, like I was just trying to piece together the past. But the truth was, I was digging deep. I was hunting for anything that would expose him, anything that would bring his carefully constructed world to its knees. The first breakthrough came from a former employee who had been let go a few years ago. His name was Daniel, and he had worked in the finance department. He had seen the shady transactions, the accounts that had been hidden offshore, and the creative ways my father had masked his assets. It didn't take long for him to trust me. I was just like him, burned by my father's cold, calculated actions. "Jess," Daniel said one night over the phone, "I never thought I'd see the day when someone in your family would be the one asking questions. I always knew something wasn't right. You deserve to know the truth." He sent me files, documents that outlined the financial discrepancies, the falsified reports, and the illegal transfers that my father had orchestrated. The pieces were falling into place. My father had thought he could get away with it all, but now I had the proof. I had everything I needed. It felt strange to sit there, staring at the documents, knowing that I was holding the key to their destruction. But I didn't feel joy. Not yet. It wasn't about that. It was about justice. About making sure my parents could no longer pretend they were perfect, that their world was as pristine as they wanted everyone to believe. I kept working in the coffee shop, continuing with my studies and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But deep down, I knew that everything was building toward one pivotal moment. I was just waiting for it. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how far my father had gone. It wasn't just about the money. It was about his control. He had built an empire on the backs of people who trusted him, and now he was going to pay for it. His arrogance had always been his downfall, and it would be what brought him down this time. I couldn't help but think of the Thanksgiving dinner, of the way they had treated me like an afterthought. My father had always been so careful with his image, so obsessed with appearing flawless to the world. But now, his perfect world was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I continued gathering more evidence. Every email, every phone call, every conversation. I took note of everything. Nothing would be left to chance. I was methodical, calculating. It was exactly what he would have done in my position, and now it was time for him to feel the consequences. Then came the next piece of the puzzle, the thing I had been waiting for. A woman named Laura, an old business associate of my father's, contacted me. She had been with him through the good years when everything was thriving, but after a huge business deal had gone south, she had been shut out. She had information on some of the most questionable transactions my father had made, transfers to off-the-books accounts, bribes disguised as consulting fees, and fraudulent reports filed to keep investors in the dark. "Jess," she said over the phone one night, her voice shaky, "I know what he's done. I can't let him get away with this anymore. He's ruined people's lives, including mine. It's time to expose him." Laura didn't have to convince me. I already knew. But her words gave me the final piece of the puzzle. She was ready to testify, ready to stand up and make sure the truth came out. And that was all I needed. With the evidence I had, I was ready. My father's empire would crumble. I would make sure of it. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to let the world see him for who he really was. I had a plan and it was time to put it into motion. The day I had been working toward for months finally arrived. Every piece was in place. Every connection, every document, every conversation had led me to this exact moment. It was time to execute my plan. I had spent weeks, even months, carefully laying the groundwork. I knew exactly how my father operated, his overconfidence, his need to maintain control at all costs. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he could always stay one step ahead of everyone. But now, it was his own arrogance that was going to destroy him. I spent the morning double-checking everything, confirming the information, making sure I had the right witnesses lined up, and ensuring all the evidence was in order. The trap was set. I had played my part and now all I needed was the perfect moment. As the day went on, I kept my distance. I knew Emily would be with them, keeping them busy with her endless talk of her future. She was still living in her perfect bubble, oblivious to the fact that the world was about to change. She wouldn't be able to help them this time. I spent the afternoon preparing the final piece of my plan. I wrote the email, short, to the point, and devastating. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was all about the facts, the truth that could not be denied. I made sure to send it to the right people, the media, the business contacts, the authorities. I made sure that everyone who needed to see it would. And then the phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my father. I hesitated for a moment. I knew this call would be different. The calm before the storm. He had no idea what was coming. Hello. I answered, my voice steady but my heart pounding in my chest. Jessica. My father's voice came through the line, strained. We need to talk. I felt a small, ironic smile tug at my lips. This was it. This was the moment where everything he had worked for, everything he had built on lies and deceit, was about to come crumbling down. What about Dad? I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I had no intention of playing into his trap, no intention of letting him control the conversation. You've done something, he said, his voice growing more frantic. What is this I'm hearing about the media? About the authorities? Who did you tell? What did you do? I felt the adrenaline surge through me. This was exactly what I wanted. He was panicking. He knew he was losing control. Dad, I said, my voice cool, I didn't do anything. You did this to yourself. You've been running from the truth for so long, and now it's finally catching up to you. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, his frustration mounting. This isn't the way to handle this, Jessica. You don't know what you're doing. This will ruin everything. You're ruining everything. I let out a soft laugh, the sound sharp and bitter. I'm not ruining anything, Dad. You did that a long time ago. You just didn't realize it yet. The silence stretched on. I could feel his panic radiating through the phone, his carefully constructed facade starting to crack. The trap was working. I'm trying to protect you, he finally said, his voice low and pleading. You don't understand what this will do. You're making a huge mistake. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had wanted to hear him beg. I had wanted to hear him acknowledge the mess he had made of everything. But now that he was finally admitting it, I realized that the satisfaction I had been hoping for wasn't in his apology or his pleas. It was in the knowledge that he was finally paying the price. I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice steady, unwavering. And for the record, Dad, I'm not making a mistake. You are. You always have been. And with that, I hung up. The next few hours felt like an eternity. I kept checking my phone, watching as the notifications rolled in. The media was already picking up on the story. Whispers were turning into headlines. The truth was finally breaking free, and there was nothing my father could do to stop it. I watched as the walls he had built around him began to crumble. First, the business contacts started to pull away. Then came the board members, the ones who had blindly followed him for years. They were the first to distance themselves, but I knew it wouldn't be long before everything else followed. My father's downfall wasn't going to be immediate, but it was inevitable. The truth had a way of doing that, of making sure no one could hide from it forever. I could feel the tension in the air. He had made the mistake of thinking he could control me forever. But now he realized he had lost everything. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the silence was almost deafening. The satisfaction I had expected wasn't there. Instead, I felt something else, something more profound. A quiet peace. I had done it. I had finally taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had exposed my father for who he really was. The man who had manipulated, deceived, and controlled everyone around him had finally been brought to his knees. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had no need for revenge. The truth had been enough. And tomorrow the world would see him for what he truly was. It didn't take long for the storm to break. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the entire world knew. My father's name was splashed across every major news outlet. His business, his empire, the one thing he had held onto with everything he had, was crumbling. The emails, the financial documents, the testimonies, all of it had been leaked to the press, and there was no denying it now. I watched as the notifications kept flooding in. Calls from media outlets, messages from people I didn't even know, all asking for comment. I stayed quiet, watching the chaos unfold from my apartment, my fingers gripping the phone, but not answering any of them. It wasn't about getting credit. It wasn't about the satisfaction of knowing I had orchestrated the downfall. No, the real satisfaction came from the silence that followed. The silence of a man who thought he could hide behind his wealth, his power, and his reputation. Now his world was falling apart. I waited a few hours, letting the panic settle in. Then I made the call. Hello. My mother's voice came through, shaking, barely audible. Mom, I said, calm but firm, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make everything go away, but it's too late. The truth is out. There was a long pause before she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You don't understand what you've done, Jessica. This will destroy us. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. But it wasn't about her. It wasn't about the consequences she would face. It was about making sure they could no longer ignore me. I didn't destroy anything, I said, my voice steady. You and Dad did that a long time ago. You destroyed our family, our lives. I'm just making sure the world knows what you've done. Please, Jessica. Please don't do this, she pleaded. This wasn't supposed to happen. But I wasn't listening anymore. The years of being second best, of being ignored, of being silenced, they had led me here. This was my moment. The moment I would no longer let them control me. Goodbye, Mom, I said before hanging up the phone. The following days were a whirlwind. My father's arrest was inevitable, but watching it happen was surreal. I had known it was coming, but seeing him handcuffed, standing before the authorities, was something I never thought I'd witness. His world was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I could hear the whispers in the background, the reports of his financial crimes, the way people he had once called friends now turned on him. The facade of the successful businessman was shattered. The empire he had built with deceit was being torn down piece by piece. The public humiliation was the least of it. The damage to his reputation was permanent. But the most satisfying part wasn't seeing him fall. It wasn't even the chaos he was enduring. It was the fact that he had never seen me coming. For all the control he thought he had, for all the ways he manipulated everyone around him, he never expected his daughter to be the one to expose him. He had underestimated me. He had always seen me as weak, as nothing. But now the world would see me for what I had become. Someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't need to. The justice I had sought was far deeper than watching him lose everything. It was about reclaiming my own power. It was about standing up for myself in a way that they could never ignore. And as the dust settled and the scandal that rocked my family continued to unfold in the press, I turned to my own future. It was time to build something for myself, something that no one could take away from me. I focused on my education, on my career. I had signed up for that business management program, and now, with the lessons I had learned from my father's mistakes, I was more determined than ever to succeed. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had everything I needed inside me. One evening, I sat down with Grandma and we talked about everything. The betrayal, the revenge, and what was next. I had learned so much over the past few months, not just about my family but about myself. You've come so far, she said, her voice full of pride. I never doubted you, Jessica. You always had the strength. You just had to find it. And as I looked at her, I realized that she was right. The strength had always been inside me. I just needed to stop hiding from it. As the phone rang with yet another call from the media, I smiled to myself. I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone to validate me. I had done this on my own. And no matter how much my parents tried to rewrite their own narrative, they would never be able to change the truth. My life was mine now. And nothing would ever take that away from me again. The aftermath of everything was strangely calm. The media storm had passed, the headlines had died down, and the charges against my father were slowly working their way through the courts. There were no more calls from the press. No more emails asking for my side of the story. No more reminders of the family I had left behind. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. It felt strange. Not because I didn't expect it, but because, for once in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. My father's business was officially shut down. The accounts were seized, the property liquidated, and any remaining business relationships were severed. The company that he had spent his life building was gone, all because of his greed and his arrogance. And it wasn't just about the loss of the company, it was about the way he had treated people, the way he had used his power to manipulate and destroy. The people who had trusted him, the employees he had taken advantage of, were finally getting the justice they deserved. But my victory wasn't in the downfall of my father. It wasn't in the chaos he was facing. The real victory was that I had done it on my own. I didn't need their approval, their acceptance, or their validation. For the first time, I felt like I had truly taken control of my own life. Grandma and I spent more time together. She didn't ask questions, didn't prod about the specifics of the scandal. She already knew. She had always known. She had been the one who had supported me when I had nowhere else to turn. And now I was finally able to return the favor. One night, we sat on the porch, sipping tea as the last remnants of daylight disappeared. I hadn't felt this peaceful in years. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about the revenge that had once consumed me. It was about the fact that I had rebuilt my life, something my parents had never believed I could do. "I'm proud of you, Jessica," Grandma said, her voice soft as she took a sip of her tea. "You've come so far. You've shown everyone who you really are." I nodded, but it wasn't just about proving something to others anymore. I had finally learned to believe in myself, to trust that I was capable of doing anything I set my mind to. It wasn't about outshining my father or my mother. It was about realizing that I was worth more than they ever gave me credit for. "I'm proud of me too," I said, looking out at the horizon, the soft glow of the city lights just starting to flicker in the distance. "And I don't need them to tell me that." For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I had done the hard part. I had taken back my power, reclaimed my voice, and stood tall despite everything they had thrown my way. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about anger. It was about freedom, the freedom to finally live my life on my own terms. The phone rang again, but this time I didn't flinch. I knew it was the last remnants of the fallout. It was probably my mother calling again, begging for forgiveness, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. I didn't answer. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't need to be dragged back into their toxic world. I had a new life now, and it wasn't defined by them. I looked at Grandma, who was smiling softly as she watched the sunset. "You've earned this, Jessica," she said, her words filled with love and wisdom. "No one can take that away from you." And as the days passed and I moved forward with my life, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying them. It wasn't about causing their downfall. It was about thriving despite them. It was about doing it all on my own, with no help, no guidance, and no validation from the people who had never believed in me. I finally had what I had always wanted: freedom. And that was more than enough.